Since the 8-string guitar is a relatively new instrument in the world of music making, there isn't any published notated material for it, at least as far as I can find. This means that there is no established practice as to how one should notate for the 8-string guitar. So in today's video, I'm going to examine this question a little bit. What is the best way to notate for the 8-string guitar? I'll examine a few different options. By the end, we can see which one will be best and hopefully will become the established practice. Traditionally, the guitar is notated in the treble clef. However, when the notes are played on the guitar, they sound one octave lower than they are written. For example, this note here is a middle C on the piano, but when it's played on the guitar, it sounds one octave lower than that middle C. If we look at the full range of the 6-string guitar in first position, it looks like this, with the lowest note E falling below the third ledger line under the staff. So back to our problem at hand with the 8-string guitar, if we stick to just using the treble clef like has been done with the guitar up to this point, we can see that the lowest note, F sharp, in standard F sharp tuning, now falls 6 ledger lines below the staff. This is a bit of a problem. If any of you have ever learned to read music on the guitar before, you'll know that learning to read down to that third ledger line is probably the hardest part. Writing anything lower than 3 ledger lines is just going to make your eyes cross and give you a headache at the end of the day. It will also eat up a lot of time if you're writing music by hand and having to write all those ledger lines yourself, and it really clutters up the page. This is literally the reason why clefs were invented, is to avoid too many ledger lines. So sticking with just the treble clef is not the solution here. This brings us to our second logical choice, which is to use the bass clef instead, since we have so many low notes now. If we write those lowest notes in the bass clef, it fits absolutely perfectly and doesn't even go down to the first ledger line below the staff. With the bass note issue solved, we have a new problem. All of our high notes now sit way above the bass clef staff using multiple ledger lines, and this is just in first position. It's not even taking into account any of the notes that go beyond fret 4 or 5. One other obvious issue I can see by changing to bass clef is just the fact that a lot of guitarists who already know how to read music using the treble clef are not going to want to put in the effort to relearning how to read music completely in a new clef. It kind of undoes a lot of work that's already been done. So that brings us to option 3, the grand staff, using the treble clef and the bass clef together. This two-staff method of notation is what is used by piano players, harpists, accordionists, and other instruments who have a large range to cover. If we look at our full range of the 8-string guitar now, at least in first position, spread across these two staves, we can see that we don't have to use a single ledger line, other than that middle C note, but that one's easy enough. The range fits absolutely perfectly. Notating it this way also allows you to retain any of the reading skills you have in the treble clef and will only require you to learn a few of the notes again in the bass clef. Now there are two ways we could choose to use the grand staff as laid out in this forum post from mid-2023. The first would be to use the treble clef for all 6 standard strings and then only use the bass clef for the 2 new bass strings. So this makes it so that the 6-string guitar directly transfers to the 8-string guitar reading and we only have to add 2 strings afterward to the bass clef. The second way would be to evenly spread the strings across the grand staff, resulting in 4 of the open strings in the bass clef and 4 of the open strings in the treble clef. I prefer the second option as it looks a lot more normal and avoids confusing use of ledger lines within the grand staff. Another benefit of this method is that there is a lot of flexibility in how you use the grand staff. For example, if there are a lot of high notes in the passage and you don't need those notes in the bass clef, you can simply use 2 treble clef staves. This will allow you to clean up the notation and divide up the rhythms into more logical rhythmic cells. Similarly, if there are just a lot of low notes in a passage, you can just use 2 bass clefs. In other situations, there might be super simple passages that require only 1 staff. In this case, you can simply eliminate one of the staves and use either treble or bass clef, depending on what notes are being played. And there are even more options to explore with the 2 staves. For example, if you use a 2-handed tapping technique, you can use 1 staff for the left hand and 1 staff for the right hand to divide up the hands like that. All of these things are already standard in piano notation and don't require inventing a whole new method of writing music. And in fact, they actually already exist in some guitar notation. Take this piece In the Woods by Toru Takemitsu, for example. He uses 2 treble clefs almost the entire time in order to have a cleaner notation separating some of those more complicated rhythms or dense chord passages. So that leaves the question, how do we learn to read in the bass clef? While there are lots of method books for how to read notes on a 6-string guitar that can help you learn the treble clef, there is no method book for how to read notes on an 8-string guitar that will teach you those lower notes. There are a few different ways you could go about learning these notes, but my recommendation is to just grab a bass guitar method book and work through that. Just remember that the location of those notes on the bass strings will not be quite the same because our tuning is different. To help you with this, I've made a note diagram sheet that you can download and put right beside your book while you're learning, and that way you can always keep track of where you should be on the 8 string while playing through the material given to you in the bass book. The link will be in the description below. My proposal then for reading music on the 8 string guitar is to notate using the grand staff. The grand staff has a long tradition of being used for the piano, and will make it so that we don't have to invent a whole new method of notation for our 8 string. I'm hoping to create some sight reading materials and etudes in the near future, so if that's something you'd be interested in seeing, let me know in the comments below, and maybe let me know what kind of pieces you'd be interested in playing. Also, let me know what your preferred reading method is. Do you even read notation anymore? Is it obsolete? Can we just use tab and accomplish everything there with a lot less hassle? But that's all for this week. If you're looking for some online lessons for the 8 string guitar, or you just want to support the channel, I'll leave the links in the description below. But otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and happy practicing.